Hi. I'm really excited about this video. I've been putting it off for what feels like months now. I'm not sure if it's actually been months or not, but it sure does feel like it. And the time seems to be right, so we'll see if that proves to be true. Today I'm going to be talking about the High Priestess in Tarot, number 2 in the major arcana. Excuse me. And there's so much to be taken in with the High Priestess. So I'm just going to go through some of what she means to me and how I perceive her and some of the other elements and some of the other suits, how she shows up, and how there's sort of a consistent theme of her energy in all of the number 2 cards throughout tarot decks. So the first thing is embodies if that's even possible, the space between. So if you think about the matter that we possess, the space, the mass that we are, and how, the only way we exist, even on a molecular level, is looking at the space between, say, the nucleus and the protons or neutrons or electrons. And then you look at the space between atoms, and then you look at the space between planets, and the space between galaxies and solar systems and universes, and it becomes infinitely clear and also mysterious by its very nature how much space there really is, and how infinite space really is, or seems to be. So there's a very symbiotic relationship between matter and space. And I like to think of that whenever I think of the High Priestess, because there's always this curious case of the magician coming first and then the High Priestess coming next. I honestly wouldn't be perturbed at all to see a tarot deck where the High Priestess came first and the magician came next, because honestly, the Fool is the thought. And then as far as what came first, the chicken or the egg, the space or the matter, I feel like they both have a place in that first space. And the age of the divine feminine is coming. So besides the goddess decks that we see an overwhelming abundance of now, which I'm super, super excited about, I'm also excited about the embracing what it means to really flip the masculine and feminine script around a little bit. And not just in feminine embodying more masculine places and vice versa, but feminine coming first, feminine being the primary space holder. So I'd like to see more of that in the future. But just like there are masculine attributes within feminine bodies and vice versa, there is matter in space, and there's also space inside of matter. So the next thing that I have to mention is it's kind of like breathing in and breathing out. When you breathe in, you're taking everything in, you're holding space, you're literally creating space in your body. When you breathe out, you're manipulating that, you're letting it go, you're contracting, you're removing space from your body, you're removing matter from your body. Your lungs literally purify a lot of the stuff that our body can't process. So that's a pretty majestic role in and of itself, but I think the High Priestess is a key into really owning the power of those breaths. She could be the out breath or the in breath or both. She could be the whole process, baby. Same with intentions and actions. I think a lot of times there's a lot of prevalence based on or invested in the high priestess being sort of like the intention, where you go to find your intentions, where you go to determine and define your intentions. Not just find them, but to actually lay them out to get the inspiration for that. But she's also the sacred space holder in the action that you take once you declare your intentions. So she exists both in the determination of what your intentions actually are and in the way they manifest and how you deliver it and birth it into the world. One thing that's pretty clear, even though, once again, it's a shared space on both dimensions, is the unconscious versus the conscious. A lot of times the high priestess is seen as the unconscious world, the realm of the unconscious. And while I agree with that 100%, we dip our feet in it. We put our matter in it. We insert ourselves into that unfathomable void. And in the same way, the unfathomable void looks back at us and inserts itself into our consciousness. She very much has a presence in our actions, in our decisions, in our day-to-day, every aspect of our day-to-day life. She is there. Similar to the unconscious and conscious perspective, the rest and action or being awake that we engage in every day is a lot. There's a lot of high priestess energy there for me. When I go to sleep, I am going into the world of the high priestess. I am losing myself to that shamanic journey. And when I wake up, I'm back in the world of the living. But it's very much me in that void, in that land of the dead, so to speak, when we go to sleep. And it's very much still there and still present and affecting me when I come back to the land of the living, when I'm awake. So there's something kind of mystical and magical about that relationship. I just think it's really special. So the next point that I want to bring up about the high priestess is this idea of meditation and silence and me time. To me, this is a really great way to consider and dwell on the concept of the high priestess. When we have to meditate to process daily stuff that happens, when you read, and you have to think about what you read, and sometimes you have to go back and read it again, or you enjoy going back and reading it again because it's like after you think about it, you kind of have a different perspective. Or in the same way, when you're studying and you have to process it, and then eventually you learn it, that learning process that's going on, that remembering, that memory, that instant access that we seem to develop a connection with is very reminiscent to me of the high priestess energy, that shamanic energy. I've said shamanic a few times, and I think that's really important when we're thinking of the high priestess, because there's very much a spiritual, the high priestess is like this super spiritual symbol of being willing to go to these places that people normally, that we don't live in. And then it's not normal to go talk to spirits, normal, whatever normal is. It's not normal to visit the land of the undead or the astral realm. People don't think of that as, a part of traditional modern daily life. I see that kind of twisting and morphing and changing all the time as things evolve, which is kind of cool. But, the spiritual guides have always had a closer relationship to that void, to that infinite land, to that cosmos, to that unconscious soup that we're all connected to. And the more you develop a consistent, persistent, reliable, respectful relationship with that void, I think the more that void can show up for you in helpful ways in your life. So there is definitely an element of, I think, self-compassion and also self-control, and across the board, respect for self, but also for others, and the other, the infinite other, that you have to sort of cultivate to have that healthy connection with the High Priestess energy. So I just wanted to throw that out there before I go on to the next little step that I had, which was connected to meditation and all of that. But it's just the idea of taking everything in and observing that which surrounds us. Having a place where you can kind of process everything that you are consciously choosing. And from that place that you process, the next conscious decision you make could be a little wiser, could be a little more comprehensive. So the next part that I wanted to cover, which I've kind of already covered, but is this idea of the infinite void and the collective unconscious, which is basically this idea where all of our dreams come from, the place that we go to when we meditate, the place where we get inspiration for art, for all of our creativity. It all kind of comes from this infinite void. And having a relationship with that void and being able to see and navigate that void is a big part of mastering yourself, being present in the world, truly like having a grip on reality. It kind of sounds counterintuitive, but if you want to know what reality is, it helps to know what reality isn't. And what it could be. Everything, reality is kind of this smorgasbord of perspectives anyway. So knowing what else is out there is extremely helpful. And I think that's what the High Priestess helps us do, is just navigate that infinite space. So what I'm going to do now is read some key words from all the different areas of tarot, the different suits. So in the major arcana, of course, we think of the High Priestess. We think of usually intuition, the void, wild, feeling, impressions, instincts, untamed, feral, a response, a receptivity, the feminine, holding, space, the expanse, the capacity, the volume, the scope, the clearance, the settling, the void, which you'll notice in common vernacular, if something is void, it's deemed as worthless. So there is definitely sort of a rite of passage to navigating the void, to seeing what is empty as actually all containing, vacant, dark, uncultivated. So the idea of the High Priestess is sort of cultivating that inner landscape, your own inner landscape, sort of making a garden where people thought nothing could grow, maybe a desert or a jungle or a sea, seeing things a little bit differently. In the wands, the fire suit, the 2 is called dominion. Some of the words that came up for that are control, force, intention, supremacy, ascendancy, dominance, superiority, authority, mastery, command, direction, power, sway, rule, sovereignty, autonomy, focus, dependency, territory, satellite, bedrock, anchor, center. To me, this just reminds me of when the wands are going up in number, they're kind of like branching away from the strongest point. So I just think of dominion as when your energy is tied in and focused in one particular area, and maybe in 2 particular areas, like it's still really strong. Like if you're only focusing on 2 things all day, those 2 things that you're focusing on are going to be blowing up. They're going to be getting all of your energy. So, the more you do, the more you branch out, the more you build, the less energy you have to invest, the less focused it is, the less reign, the less dominance, the less supremacy you have over all those different areas that you're investing in. So then we move on to swords, we move on to the air suit. And some of the words that come up in that are peace, split, ambivalence, definition, decision, tranquility, pause, calm, still, solitude, silence, accord, goodwill, non-aggression, friendship, respite, stop, cease, halt, discontinue, lull, interruption, stay, hiatus, space, interval, break. This, to me, you can see there's a sort of like, take a step back, take a deep breath, pause. Like that's the wisdom of the High Priestess coming in and saying, process, look at this a little bit more closely after you look at it a little less closely. And then we move on to the earth energy. I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of time, so I'm trying to do this quickly as possible. Clarity and change. Change is the big keyword for number 2 in discs or pentacles. But I think of clarity, choice, direction, movement, a shift, an adjustment, advance, development, difference, innovation, a switch, a transformation, a transition, variation, distortion, correction, metamorphosis, modification, growth, expansion, a turn, variety, refinement, mutation. So similar to, when you've got all your energy and you're focusing it in one place and it's really powerful. And the more you branch out and start to build different interests and build different branches, your energy is kind of eventually going all over the place, it feels like sometimes. When you're growing, it's a similar thing. When you think of like a tree that's going from the ground or a seed that's planted in the ground, it's bursting through the earth. It's mutating. The seed itself is mutating. It's taking on new form. And so all of this is sort of like reminiscent of the changes that we go through as we grow into new forms and as we develop. And that time, that empty space, that void of worthless nothingness, that is all of life, that is all of time, is the power that grows us. So that's kind of interesting. And then the final category is love, from the cups, the water element of the minor arcana. Investment, elements, combination, chemistry, unity, affection, appreciation, devotion, emotion, fondness, friendship, infatuation, lust, passion, respect, taste, tenderness, yearning, involvement, enchantment, piety, regard, sentiment, weakness, zeal, worship. These are the keywords that come up when you have that watery connection. When water meets water, what does it do? It envelops it. It becomes it. There's no difference between it. They can't help it. It's unconsciously bound to attract, to attach. And that's kind of what comes up when you find someone that you're infatuated with, when you fall in love, when you make a new friend, when you have that undeniable chemistry with either a person or if there's something you're in love with, if there's an area of life you're in love with, if there's a new subject of study you're in love with, if you're in love with your work, if you're in love with nature or with your god or goddess, that feeling of I don't want to be separated is just the divine feminine when she envelops and embodies and contains and absorbs what it is she wants. And that there's nothing really that we can do about that energy per se. We have choice over our actions, but you really have to have a healthy regard and respect for the High Priestess, I think, for the void, the infinite void, where this all comes from, to really be able to choose wisely in a situation where form takes on form and the body wants what the body wants, the mind wants what the mind wants, the heart wants what the heart wants. When you feel that lust, that passion, that yearning, like to separate from what is chemical and what is logical, what the mind knows, that the mind needs to have that space. Take a breath, have some space, that takes an incredible amount of self-control, an incredible amount of self-respect. And I think that's for me, one of the whole joys of studying the tarot is just how incredibly complex and multidimensional this whole system is. Like, it just spans into every aspect of life, and it's very interconnected. All the twos are very interconnected. They have a lot in common, but they're also very different. They also break apart in very different ways. There's a big difference between regard and superiority. There's a big difference between peace and emptiness. And there is some emptiness in peace, but I was trying to find something that's a little bit more opposite. But there's a big difference between lust and mastery. These are things that you can, you're more than welcome to use some of the words that I've used if that helps you understand it, but to compare and contrast these ideas and just kind of like see where you fall on the spectrum at any given time, and what does that mean for you? What action do you take having stepped back and taken in all that space? how do you process it? How do you move forward? How do you choose from that point on? So I hope I've done the High Priestess justice. I know this is a little bit rushed sounding and feeling for me, but I wanted to just make it as succinct as possible. I wanted it to be something that somebody can just sit down, watch, get a lot of information, and study or process it. Go and process it. So that's all I've got for today. I hope everybody has a great day and is doing great. And hopefully I'll see you before a couple months have passed. Thanks, guys.